And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on our podcast today, Leveraging Thought Leadership. I am thrilled, I'm delighted today to have with us Dan Pink, and I'll give you a quick intro to Dan if you don't know who he is. Dan's the author of 6 provocative books, including his newest, which is When, The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing, which spent 4 months on the New York Times bestseller list. His other books include the long-running New York Times bestseller, A Whole New Mind, and the #1 New York Times bestseller, Drive, and To Sell Is Human. His books have won multiple awards. They've been translated into 39 languages. He lives in DC with his wife and 3 kids. Little known facts, or somewhat little known facts, he was a speechwriter to Al Gore for years, and he's been in the top 15 on the Thinkers 50 for 6 years running, which is a pretty impressive run there. So welcome, Dan. Welcome aboard.
Thank you, Peter.
So how do you go from sort of your background and then law school and all that to, blink, fast forward, it's 20 years, New York Times bestseller, keynote speaker, blah, blah, blah. How the hell does that happen?
Really, as with most things in life, in a half-assed, unpredictable, chaotic way. It took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up. And so I went a fairly conventional path, and then I did, as you mentioned, I did go to law school. Once I was in law school, I realized that I wasn't really cut out for the practice of law. It wasn't really like my strength, what I was interested in. So I started working in politics, and politics is something that at the time I was deeply interested in. And I just kind of fell into speech writing, as is often the case. I mean, and this is some of the advice that I give to young people is like, if something needs to get done and no one else wants to do it, right, raise your hand. And so for me, I think it happened when somebody needed, I was working at campaigns and other kinds of jobs, and somebody needed a speech. They needed a speech, and they just, whoever that was in charge turned around and saw me first and said, "Hey, can you do that?" And wisely, I said, "Yeah, I can do that," having no idea how to do it.
And never done it before, right?
Yeah, and then I did it reasonably well, and then they said, "Hey, you want to do it again?" And I said, "Okay." "You want to do it again?" "Okay." And suddenly that was my job. Anyway, but I ended up leaving that world after several years for two not to make the story too long, but for 2 key reasons. Number one is that I realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my life working in politics, and number two is that I realized I was much more of a writer than I ever had imagined. Throughout my life, from the time that I was in high school, even to college, into law school, into even jobs that I had when I was 30 years old, I was always, quote unquote, writing on the side. I was writing magazine articles, newspaper columns, and things like that. I did it as like a hobby, in the same way that people play golf. And it never occurred. And it finally occurred to me, thanks in part to the product of my wife, this thing that I was doing on the side, essentially for no money, was really what I did and what I was about. And so 21 years ago, I left that job and decided to go out on my own, saying, "Hey, I'm going to figure out whether I can make it writing my own stuff." And, it wasn't this wild and woolly leap into the future, because my wife had a job. She didn't give up her job. She didn't give up our health insurance. And so I just started doing what I was interested in, because I figured if I was interested in something, a lot of people would be interested in it. And that's pretty much that's pretty much the tale. It wasn't as if, and I mean, again, not to belabor this, but I think I have 2 kids in college, and so they're at the stage in life when they're thinking about, hey, what do I want to do? Where's my, what do I want to do for work? What kind of contribution do I want to make to the world? And what I try to emphasize to them and any other young person who, against their better judgment, might seek me out for advice is say, it's very, things are very unpredictable. Life takes a lot of swerves and turns. And so don't go crazy just trying to map out everything. Just do great work, be a good person, learn, and be nimble enough to take advantage of opportunities.
Great advice. So a couple of things I want to sort of put out there. So you take this stab at writing. It's worked out well, I should say. One of the things that you do differently than most, and actually differently than I advise my clients, is you don't stick to the same thing. So there's very few people that sort of break what I call sort of the rule of being the X guy. And the X guy in thought leadership is solve for X. Marcus Buckingham is the strengths guy. Keith Ferrazzi is the relationship guy. Daniel Pink is not an X guy, right? So you go from sales to drive to timing. Yet it seems to work for very few people. Works for you, works for Gladwell, works for Godin. But tell me, contradict me a little bit. Like, what, how come the why not being the X guy has worked for you?
My honest answer is I don't know. But again, I mean seriously, Peter, and it wasn't as if there was a conscious strategic decision not to be the X guy.
Yeah.
All right. So again, so I don't want to, you're sort of seeing my schema here. My bias is that things are much more random and uncertain and unpredictable and nonlinear than we realize. And when we look back on them in retrospect, we see patterns that might be true, but that weren't necessarily intentional. All of which is to say that for me, like writing a book is so freaking hard. It's so hard, as your clients know, as you know, Peter. It's so hard that I only want to work on something that I'm deeply, deeply interested in. And so most things, most ideas that I have or that I might be interested in exploring don't scale that bar. They don't satisfy that. And so, and what for me, and maybe not for other people, is I don't want to be one of those people who writes the same book every 3 years. And you know that is out there.
Well, that used to be the formula where you talk about, and I won't name names, but like, oh, so and so is awesome. They've written 32 books. And I'm like, well, it's kind of the same book with
They've written one book
covers.
32 times.
Exactly.
Or they might have, to be more generous, they've written 2 books, 16 times.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm sort of agnostic on that as a strategy. But in terms of, maybe I'm more narcissistic than strategic in that I don't want to do that because it's boring to me.
So narcissism trumps strategy. I like.
Maybe narcissism is a strategy. Who knows? So
I like that. But let me. So what's interesting here is, when you put something out, and I don't mean to sort of be overly flattering, as people who know me will.
Oh, go ahead. No, please do.
Yeah, no, okay. All right, I'll make an exception. It's good. I look forward to it, right? So, and I never know what it's going to be. Most folks you can predict sort of at least from a path or a direction what might be next for them. But you're coming out, you go from drive, which is motivation, to sales, like, whoa, where'd that come from? And now it's like timing of effectively doing things, life hacking, however you want to sort of bucket that. And what's interesting is not only is it really good, and you can tell you're a lifelong learner, you're a curious guy, you're doing your homework, you're doing your research, etc. But the fact that it stays on the bestseller list for months and months and months, leads me to know, and not just believe, but to know that this isn't some jiggered, artificial, let's do a campaign blip. It hits, screenshot Amazon bestseller at 3 in the morning.
Oh, no.
It's the real deal. So I think
Yeah.
the fact that it's market validation from that perspective is interesting. But from a business side, so flip to the business side here of, Dan has time to spend and Dan can do lots of different things. One would argue, hey, the effective thing to do, Dan, is, be the drive guy and go, 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 go. Because you almost have to not reinvent, but once you've come out with a new piece of content, it's a little bit of a different audience. It's a different speech. Will it work in a speaking environment? Not everything sort of parlays into the other modalities that you can monetize your content in. But it seems like you're somewhat, it'll work out. Or how do you think through those things?
I mean, I don't want to sound Pollyanna-ish about this. And I don't want to give the impression that I'm not thinking strategically about how I earn a living. All right. But I really don't pay a huge amount of attention to that because I feel like if I do good work that I believe in, then I'm going to be personally satisfied. And if I'm doing good work that I believe in, the work itself is going to be good. And I am relentless enough about promoting the work,
right,
that it's going to work out. I'm not one of these. So for instance, when I say, so I have a book, I read a book. I've been with Riverhead Books, part of Penguin, for ever since A Whole New Mind.
Yep.
So this is this latest book is the 5th book I've done with them. I have another book that I'm doing for them. I love them. I've been working with the same publicist for several years now. She's extraordinary. But I say to her, you send me wherever you want. You have me do whatever you think is best to publicize this book. Within reason, I will go anywhere and do anything. So it isn't as if I say, oh, if I just put my heart and soul into producing good work, then the world will come to it. No freaking way. I put my heart and soul into producing work that I'm proud of.
And then blood, sweat, and tears to get it out.
And then relentlessly try to get the word out there.
And I think that's interesting because the only thing harder than writing an amazing book is getting it to be successful. So, and a lot of people get fearful, reluctant, I don't want to be salesy, whatever. But if you have a publicist that you trust, right, or other resources that you use internally, whatever.
I have a publicist I revere.
Yeah, which is awesome, which is unusual because most people, when you tell me about your publicist, that revere is usually not the word that comes up. But that comes from experience, and you've worked together a long time. You know what it takes, and you've got this rhythm, and you say, tell me where to go, and I'm going to do it because I need to work as equally hard getting this book out into the world, as I did in writing it. And oftentimes you run out of gas there.
Absolutely.
Give me a sense then, one of the other thing that you mentioned there, which is unusual in today's world, is a long-term relationship with your publishers. So I don't know when A Whole New Mind came. Was that a dozen years ago? How long?
That came out in, geez Louise. Yeah, you're about right. I think it came out in 2005.
Okay, so the publishing world, very different then. That's the ancient times. Yeah. Google it if you're under a certain age. That's pre-Twitter. Books at that point was a physical item that landed on, with a thud and whatever. It was the Flintstones and all that. If you've been with the same publisher, I would assume that they've evolved. And what would you be telling someone today to look for in a publisher? Be that traditional, the path you went, or some of the other options that are out there today.
Well, if you're looking for a traditional publisher, from the handful of remaining big publishing houses and the several dozen quality commercial imprints out there, I guess I would look for three things. And I have to say, it's so the two main things would be, do you have an editor who's going to make your book better? And is the house, that is the team there, really all in on the book? Like, are they really behind this thing? Or is it going to be one of 14 cans of corn that they stack on a shelf to see which one grocery store shoppers buy?
So how do you know that? Because editor is fairly easy. That's more objective than subjective to say someone's a great editor or not. But how do I know, how do you get a sense of whether the team's phoning it in or not?
This is okay. It's a great question. So this is why it's important to have an agent you believe in, and an agent that you trust, and an agent who is smart. So I've had the same agent for 20 years.
Awesome.
I can't imagine writing a book without this particular literary agent, a guy named Rafe Segalan.
Sure.
So that's important because that can be that in many ways is a writer's most enduring relationship because of turnover in publishing houses, sure. Because of, as you know, Peter, consolidation of publishing houses, et cetera, the appearance and disappearance of imprints, So having the other thing you can do is, and again, I guess I can advise other writers about this, is that, books are a business. And if you are in the book business, you should pay attention to the book business.
Yeah, no kidding.
What's selling? What's not selling?
Right.
What kind of things are getting publicity? Wow. Look at all these kinds of books. These books are all getting like a lot of coverage and publicity. Wait a second. They all come from Riverhead, or they all come from Knopf, or they all come from, they all have been blessed by John Karp or whatever, No,
it's a great point.
Pay attention to the business.
And there's also a cyclical nature. So, I don't know if you remember, but right before the market crashed in 2008, every third book on the business shelf had the word happy in, right? Happiness Advantage and happy.
Absolutely.
And it was great because everybody was happy because we overmortgaged our homes and we were driving fancy cars. And then the shit hit the fan. And, the next wave of books were about resilience, where zero is the new growth. And, so we went through a period of resilience. So there is a level of cyclical nature to the trends in the business book. And, it's almost like if you're in the fashion business and, whatever the fashion this year is, skirts above the knee and you're coming out with a long skirt going, geez, I wonder why that didn't work. Like there is something around the trends. Don't try to
totally right.
Because I think to some degree you're not shaping your content to following a trend. You're being aware of it to understand sort of the competition and what's being consumed and what's not and all that other stuff.
That's a really good point. And let me just add one thing, because again, I don't want to convey the idea that, I hope I'm not, that's like, oh, I just do what lights my fire and that the chips fall where they, you know what I mean? It's
Well,
just,
you're an East Coast guy. That's a West Coast way of thinking. You're like,
yeah, I mean, here's the thing. It's like, I actually think if you do something you really love and put your heart and soul into it, that's actually the building blocks of an effective business.
yep.
It's necessary. It's not always sufficient. And so I do pay attention to those kinds of trends. So if I were to, I don't necessarily, it doesn't shape what I do, but it might shape what I don't do.
Correct.
Okay. So it's like, oh, you know what? Here's a book on I don't know. I'm trying to
Like
think of something
innovation's
stupid.
hot for a while, or
Yeah, exactly. So like maybe, but it's like, oh, wait a second. I feel like that orange has already been squeezed fully.
or you might also feel like I really don't. I'm not all that curious about that topic, and I don't know if I have anything to add to it, and I don't.
That's another important point too. I'm with you on that. I wish more writers would say, what do I have to contribute to this conversation?
And I always say, does the world need another book on sales or execution? If you're not adding to the conversation in a really unique and different way, then who cares? We don't need another leadership book on the shelf.
Yeah, although there's an insatiable demand for leadership books. That's what I found.
But
I'm not going to write them, but there's an insatiable demand for
for
them.
good ones, which are few and far between.
That's true.
I want to pivot to, another important sort of leg in the stool, if you will, which is the speaking world. So if you think about, you've been at this for 20 years now, and that was a time when the agents pretty much ran the business. I see sort of the Louis B. Meyer with a big cigar back in the Hollywood days. It wasn't quite that bad. So the agents are important, but a lot of people are booking business directly. How do you, just give us sort of a high level, how do you think about that for you, and what works for you and what doesn't work for you?
I'm not saying this is, yeah, I'm glad you asked the question in terms of what works for me, because I think what works for me might not work for everybody. And, other people's mileage may vary. Both in the literary world and in the speaking world, I like having an agent.
Okay.
I like having someone who represents me.
Okay.
I know that I myself am a better advocate for other people than I am for myself.
So when you say that, you're talking about the awkwardness of negotiating on your own behalf and finding out like all
Right.
that stuff, which is a little funky.
Exactly. I would much rather have someone else do that. And I even know that I can be a reasonably effective advocate if I'm advocating for someone else. And I just think so. I have had, again, the writing is central to everything. Without the writing, nothing exists. And it isn't, what I don't like, because I think it's pollutes the pond of books and it screws readers, is people who write a book merely to have it as a calling card for other lines of business. It's like, oh, I need that book to establish credibility to be a consultant. I need that book to have, so that when I try to sell speaking services, I can say I wrote a book.
So it's a check the box.
Right. So for me, if you think about it, as a circle, at the white hot center of it is writing. And if that goes away, nothing exists. It collapses into that hole. Now, for the speaking, which is a subsidiary, it's a spoke on that wheel. I've had the same speaker's agent for like 13 years now. Yeah, the Washington Speakers Bureau.
Great
And
folks.
again, I like working with people who are smart and have integrity and do great work and care. And I found that they do that. And so that's worked for me. I can understand why. But again, I don't want to say that's the only way to do it, because there is something to be said for, if someone is in huge demand, there's something to be said for her booking the deals herself and not paying the commission. Definitely.
Well, especially if you're investing in the launch of a book, let's say, and as a byproduct of that, people are leaning in and saying, "Oh, can you come and do my conference, or you come and do this and come and do that?" In that instance, the agent isn't really adding value to the equation. It's more of a concierge service or a convenience or whatever. And I think it really depends. You're at a different place. I mean, you've been doing this for a long time, and you've got a brand and you got a reputation and all that. And I like the way that you framed it as what works for you. You're a long-term guy.
Yeah, and again, people have different views. There are plenty of people out there who don't go exclusively with one speaker's agency, who spread it around. The people who do it directly. It's like, I think that if I'm in a position to offer advice to people who are contemplating this, it's like, sort of try out different ways and see what works for you.
Great. One of the things you keep going back to, which I think is correct, is the power and the strength, and it all sits on a foundation of writing, which is based on not some formula that says if your last book, rocked, then come out with version 2 of that and version 3 of that and version 4 of that. You're just, you're coming out with things that you're passionate about. Have there been times where you thought something would be really exciting, interesting, whatever? You spend a bunch of time thinking about it and going, yeah, this sucks. I'm going to just scrap it and start all over again. Not a
Several
chapter, but a
times.
whole concept. Could you give an example?
I don't know if I want to give an example of the topic itself,
Okay.
but that has happened to me, Peter, many, many, many. Partly because sometimes an idea isn't good at that moment.
It's a TED talk. It's not or it's just a TED talk.
Yeah,
It's not,
exactly. So some of those things have turned into articles and whatnot. But
yes.
but yeah, that's happened to me many times. And so for instance, when I do a book, even though I've been with the same publisher, I always write a book proposal. I always write like maybe a 30, 40 page book proposal. And the reason I do that is it's easy to say, hey, I've got an idea. I should write a book about blah, blah, blah. And
Right.
it sounds great. And you feel that warm glow and you say to people, hey, I got a book about blah, blah, blah. And I can talk about blah, blah, and blah. And everyone says, that sounds really cool, Dan. And you're like, great, that's what I'm going to do. That's thin, to put it mildly. And so what I do is I will write a book proposal saying, here's the book I'm going to write. Here's generally what I think it's about. Here is how I'm going to go about writing and reporting and researching it. Here's why, to your earlier point, Peter, it's unique in the marketplace. Here is who the audience for this book is. Here is the rough timetable of how I'm going to write it, blah, 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 blah. And I will write that, 30-page document. And what that does more than anything else is it tests it for me. And there have been, as you say, as you intuited at least, there have been several times where I've started doing that. And, I literally wrote 25-page proposal and said, you know what? This is not a book.
Right. There's no there.
Yeah, there's no there. Or good God, like this bored the shit out of me. Imagine doing it for 350 pages rather than 25 pages. And I had a moment. I'll give you. This is several years ago, because I remember where I was. I was actually working in a different office. We lived in a different house. So I'm picturing the scene. So this might have been in like 20, I don't know, maybe a little bit before A Whole New Mind, somewhere around there. Anyway, so I had this idea for a book. It was sort of like a book about trends, and I thought it was going to be awesome. I thought it was going to rock the house, but I just couldn't get started writing a proposal. And so, and this is our kids were littler, and it was around like the dark days of winter here on the U.S. East Coast, and like mid-December or something like that. And I said to my wife, I said, "Hey, let's do this. Like, I just can't get on track. Why don't you take the kids, take them to her parents who live in New Mexico." Everybody likes to see the grandparents, and the grandparents like to see the kids, and blah, 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 blah. And what I will do here is I will just stay in my office for 10 days and just crank. And when my family is gone, I basically live like an animal. Like I eat out of containers and don't bathe regularly and all that kind of stuff. So
you're in solitary confinement with pizza and Thai food.
Totally, yeah. You've been there, Peter. So it's the eating out of containers that really delights me the most.
Yes.
It's like, it's like it doesn't happen that often, but like I'll be by myself for say, 4 or 5 days, and in the entire period I'll have used one plate.
Right.
But anyway, enough about my bad habits. So I sent my wife and our kids away, and after about, I think it was 6 days, I called my wife and said, I've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is that you can come home now. The bad news is that this is not a book. And so, but here's the thing: I'd rather take that hit, 6 days of quote unquote wasted time, than commit to doing something that doesn't work. And it turned out that some of the things in that book ended up being other projects. So it wasn't a complete loss. But the idea here is, as I was saying at the top of the show, writing a book is such a gigantic pain. It's so, at least for me, it's really, 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 really hard. It requires enormous effort. It is, in some ways, certain days are like torture. And so if you got to do something you really like and you really believe in, or else you're going to be even more miserable.
Well, great stuff. Well, so as we wrap up, we're running out of time here. throw out just 2 or 3 things to get folks that are in this space, thinking about being in the space, to think about doing that are working for you, or to stop doing because you just think it's silly and not effective.
Yeah. So on the stop doing, I sort of alluded to this before. I just think that the idea that I'm going to quickly write a bad book, and that's going to be a calling card for lavish
Good
income
thing.
streams on other things is a really bad idea. I have to say, as a writer, it irritates me a little bit when people do that because they come up with a bad book and that pollutes the pond. And so
Of
someone
course.
picks up their book, a reader picks up their book, and it sucks, and that makes them less likely to pick up my book because they've had the experience of being disappointed. But leaving my own visceral distaste for that, I think it's a bad business model. I think it used to be a viable business model. I think it's no longer a business model. So that would be in the don't category. In the do category, I think there are a lot of do's. Both on the strategic, even on sort of the strategic business side, the tactical business side, and even the personal side. One of the things that I would recommend on sort of the personal strategic side is pay attention to what's going on out there. Read books. I've always thought that we could cut the number of business books by at least a third if people who wrote business books had to prove that they have read a book before.
Preferably the one they allegedly wrote.
Yeah. Right. So pay attention to what's going on out there because it's all about ideas and it's exciting and you got to know what's going on and don't there's so many people who come out with stuff and it's like, okay, you realize that 11 people, there have been 11 books like that over the last 5 years. So what are you doing? Like, how do you not know that?
You're right.
So pay attention to what's going on out there, read widely, listen widely, and so forth. That's one thing on the personal side. The other thing on the personal side is it's where being a good person and being a good business person often overlap. And that I do think that there are returns to generosity. That in general, if you help out other people, first of all, that going back to happiness, like one gets a sense of happiness from that.
Of course.
And you learn from that. And, at some point, maybe down like you help out 10 people at some point, maybe. So first of all, you feel good about that because if they're decent people, actually that's inherently satisfying. But, who knows? One of those 10 people down the road might be in a position to help you out, in 8 years or 9 years or 10 years. So be generous. It's also, I just find it easier to be a little bit generous rather than to be like.
Well, there's no need to be a jerk. I mean, it's
Totally.
a fun way to make a living. It's reputational as well.
Totally. That's true too. That's a good point. That's a tactical benefit of that. But again, it's like, so anyway, so those like sort of pay attention and be generous, which I think are generally good habits for any profession.
Yes.
And then,
I would agree.
Tactically, I would say it's going to sound stupid, but like do work you're proud of.
Well, I agree.
Do work you're proud of. And that way, if it lands and it's a success, I think you enhance your chances of it being a commercial success. If it's not a commercial success, at least you have that satisfaction of doing great work.
And don't waver from that too. So this has been awesome, Dan. So I am incredibly thankful that you came on. You're one of the writers that I enjoy the most.
Hey, thanks.
I can't wait till your next one comes out. And I mean that. I've obviously I read a lot and see a lot, and you do have a phenomenal reputation. Your work's great, and it's obviously worked out quite nicely for you. So I appreciate your time, and there's a lot here that you shared with us, and I like the way that you framed it. Hey, it's worked for me, so it's not the prescriptive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
5 steps to world dominance in pink.
No way.
Cool. But thank you so much for your time and for your transparency and all that you shared with us today. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you for having me, Peter. It's been a lot of fun.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.